Are you feeling overwhelmed by hormonal changes? If you're a woman, you're not alone. With over 1,000 hormone disruptors in our environment, it's no wonder things can feel out of balance. On top of that, natural changes like PMS, menopause, and other life stages can leave you feeling tired, irritable, and trapped in a constant battle with your body. But here's the good news. You don't have to suffer through it. Hormone Harmony by Happy Mammoth is here to help. This herbal formula fine-tunes your hormones, balancing estrogen, testosterone, and even stress hormones like cortisol, which can contribute to weight gain, racing thoughts, poor sleep, and more. With over 40,000 five-star reviews and a bottle selling every 24 seconds, the results speak for themselves. Ready to feel like yourself again? For a limited time, get 15% off your first order at happymammoth.com using code NEXTCHAPTER at checkout. Visit happymammoth.com today and get your old self back naturally.
Now more than ever, Lowe's knows you don't just want a low price, you want the lowest price. And with our lowest price guarantee, you can count on us for competitive prices on all your home improvement projects. If you find a qualifying lower price somewhere else on the same item, we'll match it. Lowe's, we help, you save. Price match applies the same item. Current price at qualifying retailers. Exclusions and terms apply. Learn how we'll match price at lowes.com/lowest price guarantee.
NetCredit is here to say yes, because you're more than a credit score. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partners. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
Did you know 39% of teen drivers admit to texting while driving? Even scarier, those who text are more likely to speed and run red lights. Shockingly, 94% know it's dangerous, but do it anyway. As a parent, you can't always be in the car, but you can stay connected to their safety with Greenlight Infinity's driving reports. Monitor their driving habits, see if they're using their phone, speeding, and more. These reports provide real data for meaningful conversations about safety. Plus, with weekly updates, you can track their progress over time. Help keep your teens safe. Sign up for Greenlight Infinity at greenlight.com/podcast.
Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Hello, and I'd like to welcome ABC News senior national correspondent Eva Pilgrim and host of the What Happened to Holly Bobo podcast. Eva, thanks for hanging out with us on True Crimecast today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I was telling you off the air that this is a case we covered pretty early on, probably 6 or 7 years ago in East Tennessee. So my co-host is from that area, so certainly of interest to us. So to see it coming back up, I hope means that there is some movement maybe on what is happening as you're investigating. But if you would, just give us some background about what happened to Holly and then maybe how you ended up on the story.
So Holly Bobo was a young woman who was a nursing student. She was living at home with her parents. One morning she wakes up, she's preparing for an exam. And as she goes to leave, someone is there in her parents' carport. And her brother is awoken to see his sister walking off into kind of a wooded area, and he's the last person that ever saw her alive. It took years for investigators to be able to get an arrest. It took years for them to find her body. Someone was convicted. A jury did convict Zach Adams for the murder of Holly Bobo. And now I was brought back into this case. This wasn't a story that I covered at the very beginning. I wasn't at ABC News when this initially happened, but I was sent to Tennessee because the star witness in this trial recanted his testimony. He decided that he told someone that he made it all up. It was on audio and video. We were shown the video. And so I was sent to Tennessee to figure out what's happening next in this case and what this all means. I think a lot of people thought it was put to bed and it was over. And this has sort of brought it back into the spotlight.
Yeah, 6 people were arrested during the course of the investigation. One of those committed suicide. That was Shane Austin. And his brother, if I'm not mistaken, is Jason, and he's the one who's recanting. Is that correct?
So it's not his brother. His brother is Dylan. So it's Zach and Dylan Adams. There were four guys that were part of this
Mm-hmm.
group of friends that ended up the main sort of group of suspects. So it was Zach and Dylan Adams. Dylan was his younger brother, Jason Autry, and then Shane is the friend, the other friend that was also involved.
Yes. So Zach and Dylan and Jason were all charged and went to trial. And like you said, Zach was convicted of the murder. But the investigation had so many other elements. There were other suspects with interesting backgrounds that were looked into. There were rumors of a video recording of what happened to Holly, but as far as I know, none was ever found. It was supposedly on a cell phone. So there were enough questions around this, even with the convictions, that I think most of the community felt uneasy. Is that the vibe you've gotten as you're getting back into it?
When we went back to Tennessee, the people that we talked to, there's a lot of mixture of thoughts. Some people think justice was served, the case was done, these are the right people. There were other people who had questions. It wasn't a fully definitive answer, I don't think, locally. And then, once you start to go online, people have, their armchair quarterback ideas about how the investigation took place and what paths leads, and TBI has been very upfront saying that they exhausted every lead. And we've been able to get our hands on the full case file for this case, and it's huge. I mean, there is a lot in this case file. So they did a lot of investigating. There were a lot of pieces of evidence that they brought in, that they tested, directions that they looked in trying to get answers to this case. And when you look at the case file, that's very obvious. Zach's grandfather, the boys lived on his property and like a house on the property, a building on the property. Like they literally took like the floor out of the house, the wood floor, to go test it. They took like parts of the couch. They took like all kinds of stuff in the home to see if they could find any blood or DNA evidence, and they couldn't find any of that. But there is a lot in that case file that I think people haven't seen before. We hadn't seen it before, and it gave us access to, audio and video clips that you hear people in their own words. I mean, Karen Bobo was doing her own investigation because she was so frustrated, and that those, we could listen to those audio clips of her interrogating people, trying to figure out who was responsible for this.
Yeah, a lot of work was done, and we ended up at this conclusion. A lot of it was based on testimony. There wasn't a lot of physical evidence that was definitive tying these men to it. Is that correct?
Correct. So the only real physical evidence in this case is there was that pool of blood in the carport from the day where she was missing. There's a handprint that still hasn't been identified.
Right.
There's a footprint. And then as far as physical evidence goes, that's kind of it. Holly's belongings were found, but there was nothing on those belongings that really gave clue to, at least physical clue, as to who it was. Her body was found some years later. They were able to determine from her skull that she was shot, but there was no physical evidence that links someone to the body. And so this testimony at trial from Jason Autry, Zach Adams' friend, is really the big missing link that ties him to her murder.
And what was his testimony? What was his story? What did he say happened to Holly, and what was their involvement?
Dylan, the brother, was the original person who confessed, and that was part of how they were able to get all of these charges. And then after they were charged because of Dylan's confession, then Jason confessed. Jason's story and Dylan's story are not the same. And that's really interesting when you look at the details of it. The gist of Jason's story is that they were trying to buy drugs, that they raped Holly, and that they killed her, and then they got rid of her body. And he says that he didn't kill her, but that he was there for it. And so in his deal, he took a plea deal. After all of this trial was done, he was out of jail very soon after that. Now he's back in jail now on different, completely unrelated charges, but he got out of jail fairly quickly after this trial wrapped up.
Right. And now we're seeing this recantation of his testimony. Do you know what spurred that? What caused him to come out and say this? And when was his confession versus when is the recantation?
I mean, years went by between the confession and the recanting. So what spurred this is Zach Adams was appealing. He got a new attorney. The attorney that was handling the case hired a person by the name of Dr. Katie Spurko, who then went to see Jason Autry. And she didn't know it. She told us she didn't know what he was going to say to her. She had no idea that this was even on the table as something he would do. But as she sat down and talked to him, he just
Wow.
let all this out. And so, in her story of it all to us and us listening to his tape, you can hear him at one point say, leaving court that day after telling that story was one of the worst days of his life. He says, because he knew he had just put an innocent man behind bars.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, was he telling the truth then, or is he telling the truth now? And I think that's one of those things that, a judge is going to have to decide at some point, where is the truth and when was he credible?
Yeah, recantations are always tricky for that very reason. If at this point you're admitting you lied, well, you're a liar at some point, but when did that happen? And I think that's what they're going to have to figure out. Well, what happened in the process of the appeal after that?
That's kind of where they are right now. We're in the midst of that appeal. Zach Adams has a hearing coming up that's likely going to be a very important hearing. The judge set aside 5 days to look at all of the things, all the reasons that they're, asking for this to be thrown out and for possibly for there to be a new trial. I'm sure it's really, really difficult to get convictions thrown out and new trials. And so it'll be interesting to see what a judge decides. But Zach Adams' defense attorney it's been just a short amount of time, like a week or two ago, filed into court a filing that gives us an idea of what he could possibly be presenting during this 5-day hearing. And, it's things like there's video evidence of pictures of evidence of what those guys were doing that day that fits with the alibi that they have been saying pretty much all along. They're also saying that he had, insufficient counsel. So they're calling that into question. The recantation, obviously, an issue. And so we'll have to wait and see what a judge decides. But that 5-day hearing is coming up in like a week or two.
Okay, and your show
later this month
has a couple episodes out now. What can we look forward to in your podcast? Is this going to be kind of a live update, like fresh news as we go? Is this a full retelling with updates?
So this is a full retelling with updates, right? So what we were hoping to do is a lot of people when you look at a story like this, they have opinions. And there are a lot of reasons that people feel the way that they feel about whatever direction they think these types of investigations should have gone. We wanted to lay out for people a full picture of how we landed here, how we ended up in this place where there's this recantation, this hearing is about to happen, why the different people who are involved in this case feel the way that they do. One of the things that I think people forget now that there's this conviction is that Holly's own brother was considered a suspect for a very long time. I mean, the pressure that was on her family repeatedly, that played into some of the dynamics of what was going on in this case. There were other suspects that were considered, and there was an investigator, the lead investigator on this case, who started on the case was not the lead investigator at the end of this case. So there was some, internal TBI things that were going on. There were politics involved. I mean, a sheriff and a district attorney campaigned on solving this case. This was the most expensive investigation in TBI history. So there were a lot of reasons that they needed an answer and at least the appearance of justice, right? And so the motivations behind the decisions that people made along the way, I think are really important in understanding how we got to this moment and what it actually means.
Wow. Yeah, that's all fascinating stuff. And it was very messy, and I've always been interested in your brother's story of what he saw. And at some point there was a story about the individuals convicted showing up to show him how to cook meth, and like it's the whole thing's a mess, right? So what is this doing to the community and the family that it is coming back up? Have you been able to connect with Holly's family of those who have been uh, prosecuted for this, to see where they are with the resurfacing?
So I think Holly's family very much thinks justice was served. And it must be, as you can imagine, incredibly painful for them to have to live through this again, right? You know, they already lived through a trial. They lost their daughter. They dealt with their son being a suspect. They don't want to deal with this anymore. They want to be able to heal and try to move on. On the flip side of that, you know, we also spoke with, you know, the Adams family, Zach Adams and Dylan Adams' mother and grandfather, who are pretty adamant that they don't believe that Zach Adams did this and that Dylan had anything to do with it. And they talk about the, you know, the deficiencies that Dylan had. You know, they told us he can't even like tell time.
Right.
And so the idea that he would have confessed, that they really call that into question. We talked to Shane Austin's parents who, you know, they feel so conflicted because they wanted to be there to help find justice, but they also really believe like their son was a victim in all of this as well, that he was in many ways tortured by the looming you know, idea that he would have been involved in this in some way, and that, you know, only furthered his drug addiction in their mind, and they want to clear his name. And so it's not quite so simple as, you know, people are happy or unhappy to see this back in the spotlight. I think it really depends on who you're connected to, and that determines how you feel about it.
Sure. No, that's completely understandable. The Adams family, and I'd heard some interviews for them talking about Dylan's mental state and some things that, I don't know, this was just 2017 and 18 when the trials were and all the sentences were. But even more so now, we're thinking more about the ability to confess, what coercion looks like, what proper interrogations look like. And it sounded like for Dylan to give the first confession, not only did he confess, but he was the one who kind of brought this story into the world, I think would give maybe a foothold for the defense in this appeal. Is he appealing his sentence at all either? Or is this really just starting with Zach? And once we get that figured out, we'll move on to others.
So it's really dealing with Zach. Dylan's case is a little bit different because he took an Alford plea.
Right.
And so it's a different challenge for appeal in his case because of the nature of that. But yeah,
Can
I
you
mean,
talk real quickly about what an Alford plea is, just so in case our listeners have forgotten.
You technically plead guilty, but
Mhm.
you are able to maintain your innocence. But when you take a deal like that, an Alford plea, it removes your ability to then appeal it down the road.
Right.
And so, and that's where he lands, right? Whereas Jason Autry took a plea deal,
Mhm.
a full standard plea deal that we all
Right.
think about, where he got a shortened sentence for his testimony on the stand at trial. And so they're very different situations.
Yeah, the Alford plea, probably the most famous ones are the West Memphis Three, Michael Peterson with the Al theory of his wife getting killed. Those are how I was introduced to it, and it's a very
Mhm.
complex legal idea, and it's almost like a loophole within a loophole to say, let's just put this to bed and get it over with. And I think that goes further into the defense that Dylan really didn't know what he was getting into.
That's the argument that his family makes, that he's sort of a people pleaser and he didn't understand what was being asked of him or what he was responding to. The prosecution, on the flip side of that, would say, you know, Dylan had enough cognitive abilities that he lived his own life. He
Right.
didn't have a babysitter. He was able to go about and do all the things that a normal adult would do. And so it is that really a deficiency of any type. We have his confession tape,
Mhm.
and you get to hear it in the podcast. And so I think that's one of the interesting things the podcast space allows is you can determine for yourself what you think of that interrogation and his confession, and did he understand what he was agreeing to? And was this something that he was saying himself, or was he coerced into saying it? You can just listen to the tape.
Sure. Yeah, and then that's fantastic, and I think your show does a really good job of laying everything out. Again, we're just a few episodes in. Do you have any idea how many episodes we're going to have? How long is this going to go? I guess in theory, as long as Zach's case continues to extend, which could be a while.
So we've set 6. That's the starting point, and we'll see what happens at the hearing. I mean, we haven't made any plans beyond that point because we don't know what's going to happen at the hearing. But 6 is the number of episodes, and they're about 30 minutes apiece. So it's a fair amount of time to tell the full story, although it did take years to unfold.
Right. Are there any surprises or any huge revelations that you've had yourself going into Tennessee, whether that be just about the community or about any surprises that you're like, oh, well, I didn't realize this was the case in this situation or this area?
I mean, I grew up in a kind of small town in the South, so this part of Tennessee, and I spent a lot of time in Nashville and outside of Nashville, so it felt very familiar to
Yeah.
me. You know what I mean? So that part of it all didn't really surprise me. I think I was a crime beat reporter before I started working at the network. I worked in crime beat in multiple cities all across America. And the thing that surprised me and sort of pulled me into this story is it's rare that you see investigators who say, we got the wrong guy.
Mhm.
That like never happens.
Right.
And if it happens, it's like maybe one person questioning it, but they would never say it publicly, right? They wouldn't say it to me.
Mhm.
In this story, we have 3 investigators, an FBI agent, a US Marshal, and a former TBI agent who all
Wow.
deeply believe that the wrong guy is behind bars. Now, they weren't involved in the case at the end of the case when they had the suspect and that suspect went to trial. They were all involved in the case in the beginning, but they feel, I mean, this case shook their sense of justice
Sure.
and what they believed to be the justice system that they were working in. And so that I found to be really interesting, whether or not you believe that someone's in jail that shouldn't be in jail. It's interesting that it affected 3 seasoned law enforcement officers in that kind of way. And I think it's just it's something that you have to sort of ask more questions and explore.
Yeah, that's like you said, that's super rare and intriguing. In what episodes will we be able to hear from them?
So you hear from them pretty much right away.
Yep.
We start to hear pieces of them as they tell the story and their involvement, and then the questions. I mean, some of the interrogation tapes, you hear them in the tapes as well, but their sort of thoughts and the memories that they have are all through all 6 episodes.
That's fantastic.
It's a complicated case. It really isn't that simple. I think we like to think of these murder cases as like, you know, there's evidence and there's a guilty verdict, and it's just that. And I think the reality of the world is that oftentimes these things are very complicated. There's so many people involved in this case, both from the investigative side, but also from the suspect side, and then the families that are involved. It's just, it's a lot to go through. So we've really tried to simplify it so that people could remember each of these people and their role in it so that they understand what's happening now.
Yeah, in just the couple episodes that are out, I've already learned things that I didn't know during our research, but also just to remember all the moving pieces and all the nuances. And your show is a great way to either refresh or learn all of that new as you're trying to figure out your opinions of what happened to Holly and maybe what should happen in this appeal. So where can they find you to follow you on social media? I assume the show is available everywhere.
Yeah, the show's everywhere. You can get a podcast. It's there now. We have 2 episodes out. And we'll continue to drop a new episode every Tuesday.
And you do a great job with hosting it, but I'm also really jealous of the production. It's a really high quality show, and I encourage everybody to go check that out. So Eva, thanks for dropping by, and hopefully as more time progresses into these hearings and this appeal, we can chat again.
Cool. Thank you so much.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Sign up for Greenlight today at greenlight.com/podcast.